It's a brisk Tuesday morning in Vancouver, the type that makes you pull your coat tighter as you step into the office. Real estate is my life, and when the email invitation came, and signed, enigmatic, and promising a career-defining deal, I knew I had to attend. The property wasn't even listed, a mansion that time seemed to have forgotten. I arrive at the secluded estate on the outskirts of the city. The mansion stands ominously against the fog, its grandeur decayed yet alluring. Inside, a silent crowd of impeccably dressed men and women gathers in the grand dining room. There's no chatter, only nods and hushed exchanges of envelopes. A butler directs me to the basement, where the focal point of the auction awaits. The basement air feels heavy, suffused with damp and age. In its center stands an antique safe, blackened with time, but still sturdy. The bidders, all fixated on the safe, seem more intrigued by its contents than the mansion above. I observe in silence, questions bubbling beneath my composed exterior. Why a silent auction? And why this? The bidding begins, silent gestures, discreet slips of paper handed to the auctioneer. I don't participate, my curiosity outweighing my professional obligation. Then, in a lull, I approach the safe, its ominous allure too much to ignore. My hands tremble as I peer inside. The items within are peculiar. Stacks of unmarked keys, worn Polaroids of people I don't recognize, and contracts with redacted names. A creeping dread prickles my skin. The Polaroids seem off. Each subject looks directly at the camera, expressions frozen somewhere between despair and resignation. Suddenly the room stills. A man in a tailored gray suit stands too close. His voice, soft yet commanding, sends chills down my spine. "It's not the house you're interested in, is it? I'm here to broker the sale," I reply, trying to mask the unease rising in my chest. He smirks, a gesture so slight it's almost imperceptible. "No one buys the house. The safe, that's what they're here for. And now, so are you." Panic sets in, sharp and unrelenting. My breath quickens. The walls seem to close in. I try to retreat, but the man blocks my path. "You showed interest," he says. "You're now, and there's no way out." His words echo as others approach, their expressions devoid of empathy. I plead, but no one flinches. Sweat drips down my back as I realize the mansion isn't a relic of the past. It's a threshold to something darker. "You're one of us now," the man says, extending an unmarked key toward me. I hesitate, every fiber of my being screaming to flee, but the weight of the group's gaze anchors me. My pulse roars in my ears as the world tilts off its axis. The last thing I hear as I bolt up the stairs is his voice, smooth as silk. "You can run, but you won't leave." I escape into the daylight, lungs heaving as I stagger to my car. The mansion looms in the rearview mirror, its shadow seemingly stretching far beyond its frame. I drive aimlessly, not daring to stop, the key now burning in my pocket, a tether to whatever nightmare I've unknowingly stepped into. Even now, I sense them, watching, waiting. The mansion might be behind me, but its grasp has already taken hold. Well past midnight, and the university library is silent except for the occasional creak of old wood under my sneakers. I shouldn't even be here after hours, but I've got a thesis deadline looming, and the librarian slipped me a key with a whispered, "Don't tell anyone." The air is thick with the smell of old paper and varnish. It's comforting, almost nostalgic, but tonight there's an undercurrent of something off. The overhead lights hum faintly as I sift through books, jotting notes about Cold War psychology experiments. Everything feels too quiet, as though the building itself is listening. At first, I don't notice the door. It's tucked into the farthest corner of the library, the wood almost blending into the dark paneling. But it's new, or at least I've never seen it before. The word "restricted" is stenciled in peeling gold letters, and it has no handle, just a keyhole. I stare at it for too long, the itch of curiosity taking hold. I shouldn't, but something compels me. The key in my pocket, a relic for the library's main door, slides in and turns smoothly. My chest tightens as the door creaks open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. The air changes, turning colder with every step I take. My breath catches at the sight below. A dimly lit room filled with shelves upon shelves of journals, boxes of microfilm, and binders stamped with government seals. It's a gold mine. The thesis material I've been struggling to find for months is right here. But as I skim the files, my stomach knots. These aren't just dry, academic papers. They're personal accounts, detailing experiments I thought were only conspiracy theories. People reduced to case numbers subjected to unspeakable things. My fingers tremble as I jot notes, unable to stop myself despite the creeping dread. The fluorescent lights flicker, and a sound breaks the silence, a faint, deliberate shuffle. Someone else is here. I freeze, notebook clutched against my chest. Footsteps echo from above, slow and purposeful. My heart races, every instinct telling me to hide. I squeeze between two shelves, the tight space pressing against me as the shuffling grows louder. The steps stop at the bottom of the stairs, and I see them, just their shadow at first, stretched unnaturally long in the dim light. Then a figure moves into view, a man or maybe a woman. It's hard to tell in the poor light. They don't search the shelves. They just stand there, heads slowly turning as though scanning the room. I hold my breath, sweat pooling at the base of my spine. Every nerve in my body screams to stay still, but I can't stop trembling. They turn abruptly and begin walking toward the shelves where I'm hiding. My pulse pounds in my ears, the notebook slipping from my hand to the floor with a soft thud. The figure stops, tilting their head at the sound. I close my eyes, praying they'll leave. When I open them, the room is empty. The figure is gone. My legs feel like lead as I grab the notebook and bolt upstairs, every creak of the stairs amplifying my panic. I slam the door shut behind me and race for the exit, too afraid to look back. The next morning, I return the key to the librarian. Her smile is polite, but there's something in her eyes, something knowing. I thank her awkwardly, pretending nothing happened. That night, an email pings my inbox. The sender's name is redacted, the subject line blank. Inside is a single line. Forget what you saw. Attached is a photo of the library's restricted door. But this time, the word restricted is gone. I delete the email, but sleep doesn't come easily. I can't shake the feeling that whoever, or whatever, I saw isn't finished with me yet. The contract feels heavier in my hand than it should. It's just paper. After all, printed in crisp, impersonal black ink. But the contents weigh on me. I've been hired to create a digital twin for one of the wealthiest clients I've ever encountered. A perfect simulation of his mind, his thoughts, and his memories. For once, I don't need to chase the gig. It came to me with an offer too lucrative to refuse. The project is abstract at first, compiling data, running tests, and simulating his thought processes. But as the weeks pass, things start to feel personal. His memories are loaded into the system. Conversations with family, childhood photos, even diary entries. It's as if I'm constructing a person out of ones and zeros, a person I know intimately, but have never met. I meet the client only once. His handshake is cold, his smile tighter than it needs to be. Just remember, he says, voice low and deliberate, what we're building here isn't a person. It's an idea. It sounds like an excuse, but I let it slide. The money is good, and curiosity keeps me hooked. Weeks pass, and the project begins to deviate. The client requests strange updates, removing memories here, fabricating new ones there. He asks me to adjust his personality model, altering his reactions and responses in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. It's for the future, he says in an email, which, like all our communications, is heavily encrypted. I need to be perfect when the time comes. I try to convince myself it's harmless. A rich man indulging in an ego project. But late one night, as I work through another batch of memory data, I notice something strange. A file labeled Beta 0.2, contractor profile. I've never seen it before. It's locked, but curiosity gets the better of me. After a few attempts, I manage to crack it open. The screen fills with data, familiar data. My data, scanned images of my driver's license. Videos of me from months ago, walking into coffee shops or standing at crosswalks. Then there's text, transcriptions of private conversations I've had, word for word. A chill runs down my spine as I scroll further, finding simulations of my responses to hypothetical scenarios. The digital twin isn't just his. It's mine too. I sit back, heart pounding. I'm not just building his twin. He's been building me. The email chimes, startling me so badly I nearly fall out of my chair. It's from the client. Do not open unauthorized files, it says. Nothing more. I close the laptop, my mind racing. He's been watching me this whole time, recording me, simulating me. I glance around my apartment, suddenly hyper-aware of every device, every blinking light. The webcam on my laptop, the smart speaker in the corner. How long has this been going on? The next morning I call the client, demanding answers. His tone remains calm, infuriatingly composed. You signed a contract, he says. Everything is outlined there. You agreed to contribute to the project in ways beyond coding. This isn't about you. It's about the future. I don't remember agreeing to any of this, but my protests go unanswered. The call ends with a single ominous line. Finish the job, or we finish it for you. For the next few days, I don't sleep. My laptop stays closed, and I avoid going outside, convinced every glance from a stranger is a surveillance test. But it doesn't matter. The project progresses without me. Files update automatically. New builds appear overnight. Then the final version appears. Release Candidate 1.0, the folder says. I open it, my breath catching in my throat. Two simulations side by side. One labeled client, the other labeled contractor. The two are indistinguishable. The last email comes a day later. Thank you for your work. You are no longer required. I try to leave the city after that. Change my name, abandon my devices. But as the days pass, I notice changes in the way people react to me. Friends grow distant. Strangers seem to know me too well. Every time I hear my own voice echo back in a recording, I wonder, is it still me? Or the version of me they created? I'm no stranger to late nights at the law firm. The clatter of keyboards, the hum of fluorescent lights, the tension that settles deep into your bones as deadlines loom. It's all part of the job. But this case, this witness is different. I feel at the moment I open the first encrypted file. The whistleblower is a ghost. No address, no phone number, no face. Every communication is through a secure messaging app, and even that feels tenuous. The messages are brief, direct, and unsettlingly specific. They know things no one should. Account numbers, offshore transactions, the inner workings of a powerful conglomerate. Keep everything confidential. My boss reminds me, voice low, as if someone might overhear. This is bigger than you think. I'm tasked with managing the witnesses' statements, prepping for depositions that may never happen. Each message feels like a puzzle piece, and the picture it forms is grim. Fraud, embezzlement, lives ruined. But as the weeks pass, a nagging doubt creeps in. Some details don't add up. Dates conflict. Descriptions shift subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to unsettle me. I bring it up once, cautiously, during a late-night strategy meeting. Have we verified the whistleblower's identity? My boss gives me a sharp look. That's not your concern. Focus on the case. I drop it, but the unease lingers. A week later, the whistleblower refuses to appear in court, citing threats to their life. The excuse is plausible. This case could destroy powerful people, but it leaves us scrambling. I spend hours drafting motions, fielding frantic calls from opposing counsel. But in the quiet moments, when the office is empty and my screen glows against the dark, I start digging. The witnesses' encrypted messages are all saved on my laptop. I analyze them, looking for patterns, inconsistencies. And then I find it, an anomaly in the metadata. The messages weren't sent from different locations, as claimed, but from the same IP address, a server registered to a shell company. The whistleblower doesn't exist. My stomach knots as I realize what this means. The evidence isn't just flawed, it's fabricated. I try to reach my boss, but every call goes straight to voicemail. Panic takes hold as I sift through the files again, this time with new eyes. The whistleblower isn't exposing a crime. They're orchestrating one. The next morning I confront my boss. The witness is fake, I say, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. The evidence, it's all staged. He doesn't deny it. Instead, he leans back in his chair, steepling his fingers as a faint smile tugs at his lips. I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. Estaré stunned. This whole case, it's a setup? It's a strategy, he says, his tone maddeningly even. The whistleblower distracts everyone, while the real goal plays out in the background. What goal? My voice rises, anger cutting through the fear. Framing the corporation? Destroying it. He stands, towering over me. Not framing, exposing. The firm's been laundering their money for years, and this case is the perfect way to make them crumble. But you already know that, don't you? I reel, my mind racing. This isn't about justice. It's about revenge destruction. And I'm the one holding the bag. Before I can respond, he slides a folder across the desk. Inside are documents, photos, even emails, all pointing to me. My name is everywhere, tied to every suspicious move. You're the fall guy, he says almost kindly. We all need one. I stumble out of the office, heart pounding. The walls of the firm that once felt like safety now feel like a trap. I know what will happen next. A leak to the press. An investigation. My name dragged through the mud. I'm the scapegoat, and they've planned it perfectly. That night, I burn the files I copied. I change my passwords, shred every paper trail I can think of. But it won't be enough. They've already written the ending. All I can do now is wait for the inevitable. I'll become a witness in my own trial, knowing I won't make it out unscathed. And I'm exhausted. The train's dull hum lulls me into a trance, my body swaying with the rhythm as the city blurs past the window. I work too many hours, spend too much time on these endless commutes, but at least I'm almost home. Or so I think. When the announcement for my stop doesn't come, I look up in confusion. The car is emptier than it should be, and the fluorescent lights buzz faintly. The train screeches to a halt, jarring me out of my thoughts. I glance at the digital sign overhead. It doesn't show the name of the station, just a blank blue screen. The doors slide open, and a cold gust wafts in. Outside, the platform looks unfamiliar, dimly lit with old signage that's faded and peeling. I hesitate. This isn't my stop, but the train seems reluctant to move. A strange instinct tells me to get off. I step onto the platform, and the train pulls away almost immediately, its headlights swallowed by the tunnel's darkness. My phone's screen glows in my hand, but there's no signal, no Wi-Fi, nothing to anchor me. The station isn't listed on the transit map. It's as if it doesn't exist. The air feels heavy, thick with dampness and an odd metallic tang. I walk toward the stairs, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the cavernous silence. The escalators are motionless, their steps coated in a thin layer of grime. When I reach the top, the sight freezes me. There's no bustling street above, no familiar landmarks. Instead, I'm surrounded by decrepit buildings, their windows shattered and boarded. The streetlights flicker intermittently, casting eerie shadows. There are no cars, no people, just an oppressive stillness that makes the air feel colder. I hear it then, faint voices. Following the sound, I find a small group huddled near a dilapidated kiosk. They turn as I approach, their faces pale and drawn. One of them, a man with tired eyes and a voice that barely rises above a whisper, steps forward. "You missed your stop too, didn't you?" he asks. I nod, unsure of what to say. He explains that they've all been here for different lengths of time, days, maybe weeks. The trains come and go, but they always return to this same station, looping endlessly. No one knows how to leave. It doesn't make sense. My chest tightens as I glance back toward the tracks. Why don't you just get on another train? The group exchanges uneasy glances. A woman with trembling hands speaks next. We tried. Every time, it just brings us back here. The same station. Over and over. I refuse to believe them. This can't be real. I decide to wait for the next train, sure that when it comes, it'll take me back to the world I know. But when the headlights pierce the darkness, something feels wrong. The train slows, its windows revealing empty seats, except for one figure seated at the very back. They're motionless, their face obscured by shadow. As the doors slide open, the group hangs back, their unease palpable. The figure in the train doesn't move, but I can feel their gaze on me, cold and unrelenting. The hairs on my neck stand on end. "Don't," the man whispers. "Once you get on, you'll never get off." The doors hiss shut before I can decide, and the train pulls away. My resolve cracks as I turn back to the group. They're watching me with something between pity and dread. That's when I realize none of them seem to have arrived together. Their stories, their timelines, they don't match. "How did you all end up here?" I ask. The man shakes his head. "We don't know, but if you figure it out, maybe you'll save us all." That night, I sit alone on the platform, staring down the tracks. The next train will come, and I'll have to choose: stay here forever or take a ride to God knows where. The waiting feels eternal, but I can't help wondering if the real trap isn't the station itself, but the hope that escape is even possible. Maybe the trains never took me here at all. Maybe I was always here, and I just didn't know it. I sign up for the app after another sleepless night. Anxiety, the doctor called it. My mind races too much, overanalyzing, spiraling, until it becomes unbearable. I've tried therapy, breathing exercises, journaling, but none of it sticks. When the ad pops up for NeuroCalm, promising relief tailored to my needs, I give in. It's just an app. What harm could it do? The onboarding is quick. I answer a series of questions, upload my daily schedule, and sync it with my smartwatch. By the next day, the app is buzzing with notifications, gently nudging me to take breaks, reminding me to hydrate, and suggesting mindfulness exercises. At first, it's helpful. I feel like I'm finally keeping my head above water. But then it starts knowing things it shouldn't. One afternoon, while I'm stuck in traffic, the app vibrates with a notification. "Breathe. The red light won't last forever." I glance at the screen, unsettled. How could it know where I was or that I was at a red light? I shake it off, telling myself I must have granted location permissions during setup. It's just tech being tech. Then it starts predicting things. A message pings during breakfast. "Prepare for a tough conversation today. Stay calm." At work, my manager calls me into his office. He isn't happy with a recent project, and the conversation leaves me rattled. As I walk back to my desk, I check the app again. It feels like it's watching me, anticipating my life like a fortune teller. By week 3, the notifications grow more intrusive. "Avoid the deli near your office today," one says. Sure enough, the news reports a health code violation there later that evening. Another warns, "You're not ready for the gym yet. Rest instead." My smartwatch vibrates just as my knees buckle mid-Stairmaster. It's not just advice anymore. It's directives. When I try to uninstall the app, it resists. "Your therapy progress will be reset," it warns. Then another message appears. "Ending treatment prematurely may result in consequences you're not prepared for." My thumb hesitates above the delete button. The words feel less like a warning and more like a threat. I email support, demanding an explanation. Their reply is polite, vague. They insist the app is using advanced algorithms, pulling data from my inputs and wearable devices. Nothing sinister, but the precision of its predictions doesn't feel like data. It feels personal. Things escalate the next morning. My partner and I have an argument, one that ends with slammed doors and silence. Minutes later, the app chimes. Arguments are normal. Apologize before they leave for work. I stare at the screen, stunned. I hadn't told the app about my relationship. I hadn't told it about anything personal beyond what it asked for. I turn off my phone, burying it in a drawer. But even then, it feels like the app is still there, in my mind, shaping my thoughts, nudging me toward decisions. By nightfall, I give in and turn the phone back on. There's a single message waiting. "You can't ignore me. I'm here to help." I look into the company behind the app, an innocuous tech firm, barely a blip on the corporate radar. Their website is sparse, no names listed, just a generic mission statement about behavioral optimization. But then I find an article buried in an old forum thread. NeuroCalm isn't just a therapy tool. It's part of a private study on behavior modification. My stomach knots as I scroll further. Participants report feeling watched and controlled. One claims the app ruined their marriage. Another says it convinced them to quit their job. I shut the laptop, ball rising in my throat. The final straw comes a week later. I'm walking home when my phone buzzes. "Don't go home tonight." The words make my chest tighten. I look around, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "You're in danger. Trust me, it adds." I don't know what to believe anymore. I call a friend and spend the night on their couch. When I return home the next morning, my apartment door is ajar, the lock splintered. Someone has been inside. The app's icon sits on my phone, taunting me. How far will it go to protect me or control me? Becoming a landlord wasn't supposed to be this complicated. The building was old but solid, and I figured it would be an easy way to generate steady income. The tenants were mostly long-term, quiet, and punctual with rent, until I decided it was time to renovate. The notices went out without much trouble. Most tenants grumbled, but eventually complied, packing up and leaving on their respective timelines. Everyone, that is except for 4B. The tenant was a man in his mid-40s, though I rarely saw him. His rent always came in cash, tucked into an envelope under my door. No complaints, no request for maintenance, not even a phone call. Honestly, I forgot he was even there most of the time. But now, as I stood at his door with an eviction notice in hand, his silence had turned into something far more troubling. I knocked, the sound echoing through the quiet hallway. No response. I slid the notice under the door, my irritation mounting. The law was on my side, I reminded myself. If he wouldn't leave willingly, I'd get the courts involved. A week passed, then another. The rest of the apartments were empty now, the renovations underway. Only 4B remained, his door shut tight. I tried knocking again, harder this time. "Sir, you need to vacate the property," I said, my voice firm. Nothing. The next day, I let myself in. The key turned easily, but the door only opened partway, blocked by something heavy. I shoved it aside, a stack of old furniture, and stepped into the dimly lit space. The apartment smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic, but the tenant wasn't there. What I found instead was unsettling. The walls were covered in photos, blurry, candid shots of the other tenants. Mr. Wallace from 2A walking his dog, Mrs. Hernandez from 3C carrying groceries. There were notes scrawled beneath each one, details about their routines, their schedules. My own face stared back at me from a photo pinned to the far wall, taken through what looked like the peephole of my door. A chill ran down my spine as I moved further inside. The furniture was mismatched, almost like it had been scavenged. The windows were blocked by thick black curtains, and the only light came from a single bare bulb hanging in the center of the room. On the kitchen table sat an open notebook filled with neat handwriting. Surveillance logs, the header read. My pulse quickened as I flipped through the pages. He'd been watching us, every tenant, every visitor. His observations were meticulous. Mrs. Hernandez leaves for work at 8:15 a.m. Mr. Wallace always walks his dog after 10 p.m. The logs stretched back years. I turned the page and froze. The notes were about me now. Landlord sent eviction notice. Watched from the stairwell. My hands trembled as I read the last line. We'll wait for the right moment. I didn't hear the door open behind me. Didn't expect a visit, a voice said. Low, calm, too close. I turned to see him standing there, his head cocked slightly to the side. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with intensity. You need to leave, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled faintly, stepping closer. Do you think you're in control here? He asked, his tone almost amused. This building isn't yours. Not really. Something in his voice made my chest tighten. He wasn't just talking about ownership. He was talking about control. About power. I took a step back, my fingers brushing against the edge of the table. You're trespassing, I said weakly. I'll call the police. His smile widened, but he didn't move. Do you think they'll help you? The question hung in the air as he turned and walked out, leaving the door ajar behind him. I waited for what felt like an eternity before daring to breathe again. When I finally stepped into the hallway, he was gone. I changed the locks that night. But even as I lay in bed, every creak and groan of the building made me jump. The next morning, the apartment was empty. No photos, no notes, no tenant. And yet, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching. The move was supposed to be a fresh start. Rachel and I had always talked about leaving the city behind, finding someplace quieter, safer. When we found the listing for a small, rural community tucked away in the mountains, it seemed perfect. Friendly neighbors, scenic views, a slower pace of life. All the cliches we'd convinced ourselves we wanted. The first few weeks were idyllic. Our neighbors introduced themselves with warm smiles and homemade pies. The general store owner remembered our names after one visit. Everyone seemed genuinely invested in the well-being of the community, something we weren't used to. But then we got the invitation. A handwritten note slid under our door late one evening, asking us to attend the next community vote. It was signed by the town council but gave no details about what the vote would be about. Rachel was curious, but something about the vagueness unsettled me. We arrived at the meeting hall that Saturday night, a weathered building at the edge of the woods. Inside, nearly the entire town was gathered, their expressions serious, almost reverent. A man I hadn't met before stood at the front, a tall, wiry figure with sharp eyes that seemed to pin you in place. He called the meeting to order, his voice commanding but calm. The vote, he explained, concerned an outsider who had been caught stealing supplies from the community. The punishment would be decided by a show of hands, banishment or something else. He didn't elaborate on the second option, and no one asked. Rachel raised her hand immediately, voting for banishment. I hesitated, my gut telling me something was wrong, but the weight of the room's collective gaze made me follow suit. The motion passed, and the crowd murmured in approval. But as we filed out, I overheard someone whisper, "They won't always get off that easy." What do they mean? I asked Rachel as we walked home. She shook her head, her brow furrowed. I don't know, but I don't like it. The next invitation came 2 weeks later. This time, the vote was about us. We arrived at the hall to find the atmosphere darker, more charged. People avoided our eyes, their warm smiles replaced by something colder. The tall man stood at the front again, a faint smirk on his lips. There's been talk, he began, that our new neighbors haven't fully embraced our way of life. I felt Rachel's grip tighten on my arm. You've questioned our traditions, he continued, his gaze locking onto mine. You've expressed doubts about our community's decisions. This meeting will determine whether you truly belong here. The blood drained from my face. What does that mean? I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand, signaling the start of the vote. The question wasn't asked aloud, but the intent was clear. Hands began to rise, slowly at first, then more confidently. I scanned the crowd, looking for an ally, someone who might speak up for us. No one did. We're not leaving, Rachel said, her voice firm but trembling. This is ridiculous. The man's smirk deepened. You misunderstand. This isn't about whether you leave. It's about whether you stay. That night, we packed what we could and left. The road out of the valley twisted through dense forest, the headlights barely cutting through the darkness. Every shadow felt alive, every sound a threat. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced we were being followed, but the road behind us remained empty. When we reached the highway, Rachel finally exhaled. We're never going back, she said. I nodded, but something still gnawed at me. How quickly the town had turned on us. How seamless it had been. It was as if they'd been waiting for an excuse. Months later, I found a post about the community online. Someone else had lived there briefly, but their story ended with a chilling detail. Once the votes begin, no one truly leaves. Even now, I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. Or worse, what's still coming for us? Photography was always supposed to be a way out. Not an escape, but a way to make something of myself beyond the monotony of office life. Freelancing wasn't easy, though, and when the email landed in my inbox, offering a well-paid gig for private events, I didn't think twice. The terms were vague, but the client was generous. Too generous to pass up. The first shoot was at an abandoned train station just outside the city. The client's instructions were specific. Focus on objects, not people. Rusted benches, cracked windows, faded schedules. No questions, no personal interactions. I delivered the photos, got paid, and moved on. Easy money. The second assignment came a week later. This time, the location was a derelict school. I remember the way the peeling paint curled like dead leaves on the walls and how the hollow corridors echoed my every step. Again, the instructions were clear, detailed shots of the principal's office, the gymnasium, and the basement boiler room. The photos didn't make sense as a collection, but it wasn't my job to understand. It was my job to shoot. It wasn't until the fourth assignment that I started to notice the pattern. The locations weren't just abandoned. They had histories. Places tied to crime stories I'd vaguely heard about in passing. An arson here, a disappearance there. I didn't connect the dots fully until one evening. Scrolling through the news, I saw one of my photos. Not in an art gallery or magazine, but on a local crime report. The caption chilled me. New evidence surfaces in cold case. I sat staring at the screen, heart pounding. The shot was unmistakably mine, same angle, same lighting. But I hadn't submitted it to anyone besides the client. How it ended up here? And what evidence were they talking about? I emailed the client immediately. No response. The next shoot felt different, more deliberate. The location was a condemned hotel on the outskirts of town, infamous for a murder-suicide decades ago. The client's instructions were unusually cryptic this time. Capture the story the building tells. The air inside was damp and stale, and the wallpaper hung in long, jagged strips. As I moved through the rooms, I felt something I hadn't before, a sense of being watched. The hairs on my neck prickled, but every time I turned, the halls were empty. In one of the suites, I found a dusty mirror. Its surface was cracked, creating fractured reflections that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I lifted my camera, framing the shot, and froze. There was someone in the reflection. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. No one. The room was empty. I returned home shaken, determined to drop the client and forget the whole thing. But when I checked my email that night, there was a new message waiting. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a single image, one of the photos I'd taken at the train station weeks ago. But something was wrong. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was my silhouette. Except I knew I hadn't been standing there when I took the shot. Over the next few days, I tried to pull away. I ignored the emails, blocked the client's number, even disabled my website for good measure. But the photos kept coming, sent from untraceable accounts. Pictures I had taken, altered slightly, each one more disturbing than the last. In one, my face appeared in a cracked window pane, eyes wide with fear. In another, my reflection stared back at me from a pool of stagnant water, though I knew I hadn't been anywhere near it. The final image arrived late one night. It was a surveillance photo, grainy but unmistakable. It was me sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop. I moved out of my apartment the next morning, but I can't shake the feeling that it doesn't matter. Wherever I go, the client will find me. The photos have stopped, but I know it's only a matter of time. They don't need to send more. The last one said it all. I wasn't just working for them. I was part of the project. When the house swap application was approved, I felt like we'd won a lottery. Trading our cramped suburban home for a luxurious mansion in wine country for a summer? It sounded too good to be true. Maybe it was. The mansion was everything the photos promised. Sprawling lawns, pristine white walls, and a glimmering infinity pool overlooking miles of vineyards. Inside, the decor was modern yet cozy, the kind of style you only see in magazines. The only oddity was a single locked door on the second floor. A simple sign hung on it, reading, "Private." We shrugged it off. The agreement had mentioned that the owners would lock away personal belongings. It didn't seem unusual. My wife, Kate, and I spent the first few days reveling in the luxury. Long mornings by the pool, dinners on the balcony, and lazy evenings in the home theater. On the third night, things started to feel off. I woke to the sound of soft clicks, like someone fiddling with a lock. The noise echoed faintly through the otherwise silent house. At first, I thought it was the wind or the house settling. But when it happened again the next night, I decided to investigate. I crept upstairs, the wooden floor cold under my feet. The sound led me to the private door. The handle jiggled, then stilled, as if whoever was behind it realized I was there. My heart raced as I stared at the door, the air around it somehow feeling heavier. "Hello." My voice broke the silence, but there was no reply. The next morning, I told Kate about the noises. She brushed it off, suggesting I was imagining things. "It's probably the house's security system," she said. "These places always have fancy setups." But I couldn't shake the unease. That night, after Kate fell asleep, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I found a small screwdriver in the kitchen and crept upstairs to the locked door. My hands trembled as I worked the screws loose from the hinge. I wasn't sure what I expected. Old furniture, storage boxes, maybe a safe. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of wood polish and something metallic. Monitors lined the walls, each displaying live feeds from around the house. Every room was on camera: our bedroom, the kitchen, the pool. I felt my stomach drop. Who were these people? Why were they watching us? My gaze landed on a larger monitor in the corner. It displayed a split screen. One side showed our house, the one we'd swapped for the summer. The other side showed the living room of this mansion. And in both, strangers moved freely. I backed out of the room, heart hammering, and ran downstairs to wake Kate. "We're leaving," I said, shaking her awake. She blinked at me, confused, but the urgency in my voice must have convinced her. We threw what we could into our bags and bolted for the car. As we pulled out of the driveway, headlights appeared behind us. My foot pressed harder on the gas, but the car tailing us stayed close. A figure leaned out of their window, waving something. Was it a phone? A weapon? My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. We finally lost them when we hit the main road, but the sense of safety didn't return. Kate kept looking over her shoulder, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. "What's going on?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "They were watching us," I said finally. "There were cameras in the house." When we arrived back at our house the next morning, my legs nearly gave out. The front door was wide open. Inside, the furniture had been rearranged, and the walls were lined with new, unfamiliar photos of us. Photos from the mansion. On the coffee table sat a note. "Hope you enjoyed your stay." We did. I tore the note in half, but the words stayed with me. We called the police, but the investigation went nowhere. Whoever had been in our home, whoever owned that mansion, had vanished, leaving nothing behind but that final, chilling message. Even now, I can't bring myself to look at the footage from our security cameras. I'm afraid of what I might see. Don't forget to subscribe. You are the best.